Okay, so today we're going to use the trig ratios to find an unknown side. So giving this diagram, and remember, you can only use sine, cosine, tangent, or the trig ratios with 90-degree triangles. So they want us to find AC. And so AC is this side here. So we're going to label that X. It's always a good idea to label a variable X, Y, Z, anything you want. I like to use X. And then we have to decide which trig ratio should we use. Should we use sine or cosine, or should we use tangent? Before we make that decision, we probably should look at the triangle and label which side would be considered the opposite if we're looking at the 20-degree angle or angle B. So if we're looking at angle B, then wouldn't the side opposite be AC? So that means this is the opposite side. And isn't the adjacent side to angle B this side here? And isn't the 12, isn't that side going to be the hypotenuse? Because the hypotenuse is across from the 90 degrees. So we need to solve for X. So we want to make sure that we have something that has X in it. So we need something that's opposite. And we're going to use a 12. We're not using adjacent because we don't know anything about the adjacent. So we need something that has opposite in it and something that has hypotenuse. So which of these trig ratios has opposite and hypotenuse? Wouldn't that be opposite and hypotenuse? So wouldn't we use sine? So that's how we make a decision as to which trig ratio we should use. So we're going to say the sine of 20 degrees is equal to the ratio. Remember, the opposite side goes in the numerator, and isn't the opposite side X? And doesn't the hypotenuse go in the denominator, and isn't the hypotenuse 12? So that's how we construct our equation. Once you have your equation, can't use algebra to solve it. So don't we need to undo dividing by 12 by multiplying by 12? And we put a 1 underneath that, and isn't right? Doesn't that divide out? And so doesn't that leave me that X equals whatever 12 times sine of 20 degrees is? So that's where you're going to go grab your calculator. You're going to type in 12. You're going to hit your times key. You're going to hit your sine key, and you're going to type in 20. And then you're going to hit your equals key. Now remember, you want to be in degrees, not radians. If you're using Desmos, it's the default is radians. You'd have to go, so if you use Desmos calculator, you would have to go up into the tool up at the top and change it to degrees. Ask your teacher how to do that. If you're using your calculator, hopefully your calculator has like a little degree symbol, or I don't know, it may not be there. It might be up here somewhere, but it usually should say whether it's in degrees or radians, so you need to know for sure if it's in degrees. So if you're not getting my answer, maybe it's in radians and not degrees. So when you use your calculator, that approximately gives you 4.10. And it keeps going, right? Keeps going. They want us to round to the tenths. You need to make sure that you're reading and going back and rereading what you're trying to find. You have to use correct rounding skills or they will mark your answer wrong. So the tenths is 1 digit to the right, and we need to look at the next number. If that is bigger than a 5, we would bump this up to a 2. But because that's less than a 5, we're just going to leave it as 4.1. So our answer for X is approximately 4.1 feet or inches or yards. We don't know in this case, so we're going to say units. And remember, X was AC, so we now know that AC has a distance of approximately 4.1 units. Why don't you try a few more problems to see if you understand this? Maybe you could pause the screen on this one and see if you can do this one yourself. It says to find BC. So first of all, BC is right here. So we want to find this side. But before we decide whether we should use sine or whether we should use cosine or whether we should use tangent, we should first document that they have given us angle B, which is 20 degrees. So we want to put which side is the opposite of that angle of reference. So opposite of angle 20 would be this side. The adjacent side, oh, by the way, they want us to find BC. So wouldn't it be smart to put an X saying that's what we're trying to find? And isn't the side that's next to the angle 20 the adjacent side? And isn't the hypotenuse always across from the 90-degree angle? And so which trigonometry function has, because we want to find x, so we need something that has adjacent in it, and we need something that has hypotenuse in it, because there's no number, or here we're not trying to find AC, and there's no number there. So these are the two pieces of information. So which one is it? Right, it's cosine. So we're going to say cosine of 20 degrees is equal to the adjacent, which is our x, right? The adjacent goes in the numerator. Adjacent goes in the numerator, and the hypotenuse, remember, goes in the denominator. So that's our equation that we're building. Now we're going to solve for x. So remember, x is our BC. So we're going to multiply both sides by 12. And that gives us that x equals whatever 12 times the cosine of 20 degrees is. Grab your calculator. Make sure it's in degrees. Type in 12, hit your times key. Type in your cosine key. Hit 20. And then hit equals. What do you get? So you should get approximately 11.27. Right? And it's always smart to use the approximate symbol instead of the equal symbol to say that we're rounding, and it asks us to round to the tenths. So here's the tenths place. So we have to look one digit to the right, and since this number is 5 or bigger, that means our final answer is going to go up and bump up from 2 to 3. So that's your correct rounding skills. So therefore we can say that side BC has a length of approximately 11.3 feet or inches or whatever units. So that's how you use trigonometry to find an unknown side. Why don't you pause the slide, pause the video, and see if you can do this one by yourself. The fourth slide is going to be a little bit different. So make sure you stick around for the last slide. So we got this slide and one more to go. So the first thing you want to do is focus in on what are you trying to find? We are trying to find PQ. So PQ is this side. So we're going to put an X there saying we want to know what the length of that side is. You can use any letter, X, Y, B, H, P, Q. I like to use X a lot for things that I'm trying to find. And then we'd have to decide whether we should use cosine, whether you should sine, cosine, or whether we should use tangent. Before we decide to do that, we need to look at the angle that they gave us. They gave us angle 40 degrees. So we want to say, isn't the side that is opposite 40 degrees, isn't the X the opposite side? And isn't what is next to the 40 degrees the adjacent side? And isn't the side that goes across from the 90 degrees the hypotenuse? So we need to have something, we want x in our equation, so we need something that's the opposite side, and we need 9 in our equation, because we don't know anything about the hypotenuse, right? We don't know anything about the hypotenuse. So we need sine, cosine, or tangent. Which one has opposite and adjacent in it? Tangent does. Tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, so we're going to use tangent. So we're going to say the tangent of 40 degrees, because that's the angle that we're referring to, is the opposite side. So x goes in the numerator, and the adjacent side is 9. There's your equation. Now we're going to solve our equation by dividing or multiplying by 9 to both sides, right? Because you put a 1 over that, and that cancels out and leaves you x by itself. And then 9 times the tangent of 40 degrees. Again, you always should double check before you start any type of test and make sure that your trig is in degrees, because most of the time they want the angles in degrees, not radians, but you need to keep an eye out. Do they want radians or degrees? Usually degrees. And it says degrees right here, so that's a giveaway too. So if you punch that in on your calculator, you get approximately 5.19. And remember to follow directions. If it says to round to the hundredths, make sure you're rounding to the hundredths. If it says to round to the tenths, make sure you're rounding to the tenths. Always go back and double check where it's asking you to round. So because the 9 is between, if it's 5 or bigger, we're going to bump the tenths up one. So our final approximate answer is 5.2. They will mark you wrong if you do not round correctly. So therefore, the distance of PQ has approximately 5.2 feet, 5.2 miles, 52.2 yards. In this case, we don't know, so we say 5.2 units. One last problem. See if you can do this last problem. Pause the tape. Okay, this one's a little bit trickier. Once again, they're asking us to find PR, and PR is this side here. So I'm going to say I am trying to find the distance of how long PR is. And then I have to figure out whether I should use cosine, sine or cosine, or tangent. So in order to do that, since they gave me the 40 degrees, I'm going to label my triangle as to which side is the opposite side, which side is adjacent or next to that 40 degrees. And then obviously the hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree triangle or the 90-degree angle. So we have to find, we need to have x. So we need to have the hypotenuse and we need to have 9. So we need hypotenuse and we need to have adjacent. So which sine, cosine, or tangent has hypotenuse and adjacent? Wouldn't that be cosine? Cosine has adjacent and it has hypotenuse. So we're going to build our equation as cosine of 40 degrees equals, and the ratio is the adjacent goes in the numerator, which they said is 9, and the hypotenuse is what we're trying to find, which is x. So now that we have our equation, the question is, how do we solve for x? Well, x is in the denominator, and since we're dividing by x, we're going to bust it out by multiplying both sides by x. So that gives me x cosine of 40 degrees equals 9, because we can put a 1 underneath that, and that cancels out. And then we're going to divide by cosine of 40 degrees to both sides, because that's going to give us x by itself is 9 divided by cosine of 40. So you're going to grab your calculator, and you're going to type that into your calculator, and you should get, and if you're not getting the right answer, maybe your calculator is in radians instead of degrees. So you should get 11.74. It says to round to the tenths. So the tenths place is 1 digit after the decimal. We look at the next number, and if that number is lower than a 5, then we leave it as 11.7. So we now know that the hypotenuse, or P, the distance between PR, which is the hypotenuse in case, approximately 11.7 units long. So that's how you find size using trigonometry.